welcome to PCOM Perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Jay Feldstein, and today we're talking with PCOM Georgia faculty members Valerie Cadet, PhD, and Shirin Majidova, PharmD, about vaccine development. Along with social distancing, hand sanitizing, and wearing a mask, the development of vaccine is seen as the foremost way to combat COVID-19, a global pandemic that has defined our way of life for most of 2020. Currently, there is a race taking place among researchers and laboratories to develop a vaccine to immunize people against this novel coronavirus. Our faculty members will break down the process involved in launching clinical trials and discuss the effectiveness of these trials. Dr. Cadet is an associate professor of microbiology and immunology, received her PhD from the University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine. Her teaching focuses primarily on the immune system, mechanisms of host defense, virology, bacteriology, and general microbiological therapeutic interventions. Dr. Majidova, an assistant professor in the PCOM School of Pharmacy, earned a Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Nova Southeastern University College of Pharmacy, where she was also completed a 2-year academic fellowship specializing in pediatric pharmacotherapy. Her teaching focuses primarily on pediatric pharmacotherapy, including complementary and alternative medicine, safe medication use, and various internal medicine topics. Welcome, Drs. Cadet and Dr. Majidova. So what is the usual timeline for vaccine development and the steps involved?
It's a great question everybody asks, and the process is multi-phased. So you've got, starting with like an exploratory phase. So we've got to do basic lab research, and that usually lasts anywhere from 2 to 4 years. Then we move into a preclinical phase where we move our findings into mice or monkeys or whatever other animal model that's necessary to really look at the ability of that vaccine to provoke the appropriate immune response. That process can last for another year or two. From there, once we have the appropriate results analyzed and FDA approval, we can move into phase 1. A phase 1 trial can be anywhere from 20 to 100 subjects, and that's pretty quick. It can be as quick as 1 month, 30 days, to get some results. At that point, we would move into phase 2. Phase 2 are expanded trials that are looking at testing the vaccine in several hundred individuals. And in this case, we may expand beyond what we saw in phase 1, which phase 1 is just going to be healthy adults, typically up to age 55. And we're going to expand possibly to children or elderly or the individuals most at risk for whatever the disease is. And we're going to look at continued safety as well as efficacy and try to see how the immune response may vary in between the different groups. This process can last several months, even longer, normally. And phase 3 would be the largest portion of these trials. And phase 3 trials should involve usually thousands to up to tens of thousands of people. And in this case, it could take years under normal circumstances because in phase 3, you want to vaccinate individuals, continue to look for any adverse effects, and you want to let people go about their normal lives. And in those circumstances, then they would encounter the disease or the agent normally. And so this process could take a while. So, with everything I've just said, we're talking about, 8 to 12 or more years normally. At this point, though, we're under special circumstances, so we've got emergency authorizations in place, which can allow us to combine phases. So, for instance, maybe have an expanded phase 1 and phase 2 where we're looking at maybe including more people, go beyond the 100 individuals in phase 1, or maybe even expand the age like we saw here in some of the trials in Georgia where instead of stopping at 55, they expanded the age groups to up to 70 to help get more information quicker.
Right. Additionally, some of these companies are running phase 1 and phase 2 trials simultaneously, again, to speed up the process. So many of the companies looking at vaccines right now are doing that as well. So with the U.S. government Operation Warp Speed that we're in right now to kind of try to find the right vaccine as quickly as possible, this is where the government is investing money into different companies to try to get them to develop a vaccine that's safe and effective as quickly as possible. And that, again, includes that combination of phase 1 and 2 trials, which we usually don't see, but we do see now being done so that we can achieve that goal of having a vaccine by the end of the year or by winter of next year, hopefully. But then after the whole process of testing and clinical trials, then comes approval, which is where, the regulators in each country kind of review all the trials and decide whether or not they will approve the vaccine for distribution during a pandemic that we're in now. So these vaccines may receive emergency use authorization so that they don't have to jump through as many hurdles as vaccines usually have to go through. And then comes the distribution, so manufacturing and the distribution phase, which also can be quite challenging because we're making many, many, many doses because it is a global pandemic. We have to make millions and millions of doses and distribute them to many different countries. So this is where the challenge of the countries working together, depending on which country will develop the vaccine first. So now we have to find out ways to work together so that everybody will have access to the vaccine. Now, since we've discussed the trials and how long they take, we can expect anywhere from a year to 2 to 3 years. Usually vaccines take up to a decade from the beginning to all the way to the distribution and manufacturing phase. But of course, we don't have that kind of time. So some of the things that have been discussed by the scientific community are human challenge trials. And basically what that is that the healthy volunteer is given the vaccine and then given the virus, so the coronavirus or COVID-19 in this case, to see whether or not they will mount the immune response instead of waiting for that person to go out into the community and acquire the virus naturally. However, there's a lot of ethical issues with doing challenge trials. Just from what it sounds like, you're infecting somebody with a potentially deadly virus. Even though we're choosing, in this case, a healthy individual would be chosen who is less of a risk for having severe complications from the virus. Still, when we're thinking about vaccines for adults, usually they're not 100% effective, right? So if we think about like the flu vaccine, usually we have about anywhere from 60 to 80% efficacy every year, and it changes every year. So if this vaccine will be of a similar efficacy, we don't know whether or not this individual who's given the challenge trial will be 100% protected from the virus. So again, we might expose somebody to the disease as well. So there's a lot of kind of a fine line whether, we want to help the overall global community to develop the vaccine as fast as possible because we have so many vulnerable populations that are at high risk of severe complications. But then again, we want to make sure that we protect every individual who is exposed to the virus, and we don't want to deliberately expose them to something that could harm them. So that's basically kind of the overall process of the vaccine development, and then some of the challenges that we're facing right now with getting the vaccines approved as quickly as possible.
And I just wanted to add on to that, with all of that, I hope it puts it in context why when you hear Dr. Fauci and a White House briefing say 12 to 18 months, and he was saying that in March, at the real start of the U.S. pandemic or epidemic, that's an amazing, amazing, amazing timeline to say that we could achieve that, And, we'll talk about maybe some of the ways that whether it looks like we will or we won't, but at the end of the day, we're trying to shrink a process which is at least a decade long under perfect circumstances down to a year and a half.
Yeah, we definitely have our challenges ahead of us. So what are the different types of vaccines that are currently in development for COVID-19?
So I'll start here again. So this is an interesting thing. So every day this changes. So this is hot off the press as of July 8th, so a couple days ago. There are at least 145 different vaccine candidates in development worldwide. About a month ago, we were at 102. So that really does change. Out of that, we've got 22 of them already in trials in humans at various stages. 15 of them are in the very first phase 1 trials, and we're talking worldwide, to be clear. So that they're testing the efficacy and the safety and trying to determine dosage. 10 of them have moved on to expanded phase 2 trials where they're doing, more safety, but now in higher numbers of people. 4 of them are in large-scale trials. One of them has even been moved into phase 3 in Brazil currently. And then one finally has just been approved for limited use, specifically in the Chinese military. So we've got a variety of them. The U.S. has several of those in trial here right in the United States, and then has also developed partnerships with, some other nations or some other companies and pharmaceutical companies to get secure doses of their vaccines for individuals in the United States. So there's a variety of things. Sharon, do you want to expand on that?
Yes, absolutely. So I also wanted to mention that Emory University, so one of the biggest companies who is kind of on the track to develop a vaccine soon, Moderna, they have the mRNA vaccine that's entering phase 3 trial. So right about now, expected sometime in July, with Emory University. So they have several different sites. Emory is one of the sites that they're beginning these phase 3 trials. And they're currently recruiting volunteers, so they need thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers to start testing their vaccine. So they're on a fast track as well. And there's a couple of other companies also who are very promising in their clinical trials. So we have a company that works with Pfizer, and that is a New York-based company, and they're having a collaboration with a Chinese company as well and a German company. So they're about to enter phase 3 trials as well. And the other thing is that there's so many different vaccines right now that are being tested. And the difference between them is that they're all different kinds of vaccines. So we're using so many innovative technologies right now to try to develop these vaccines to be safe, effective, and relatively quickly. So now we're doing some innovative technologies where we're using genetic vaccines, where you're basically using the RNA or the DNA of a virus. You are changing it a little bit so that it can still elicit the immune response that we want without having to use a whole bunch of a live virus. So that's one of the types of vaccines. So the one of the biggest front runners of vaccines, Moderna, is using this genetic vaccine technology. So they're using the mRNA. We also have virus vector vaccines where we use either the coronavirus or another virus as a vector to deliver the protein of the vaccine so that it can, again, elicit the immune response. There's protein-based vaccines, and then there's our basic vaccines where it's a whole virus, whether it's deactivated completely or remove the virulent part of it. So we have a lot of different technologies as well, which I think is very interesting and very innovative, so that we all came together to try to find the most efficient way to produce this vaccine.
And actually, it's pretty amazing too, because you mentioned Operation Warp Speed earlier, the U.S. government's initiative to develop this vaccine, and they recently announced that even with all of this in the pipeline, they're still pushing to get at least 5 more vaccine candidates. So they're talking with companies and trying to get companies to either pivot from other ones or develop certain platforms that have already been in place, because there's even more unique initiatives that are out there. So we're looking to get at least 5 more candidate vaccines developed to add to that, over 145 that we have right now. So it's really interesting.
So do you see this being an annual vaccine, much like the flu vaccine is? Or is this going to be one and then, 5 or 10 years or whatever?
With the information that I understand about the virus, the coronaviruses in general, and compared to the flu virus, the reason why we have to get an annual flu vaccine is because the flu virus does something called drift. So the proteins on the surface of the virus change every year just so slightly enough that our antibody and our immune response that we've already built up the year prior isn't really going to work against the new virus this year, just because it's slightly changed. The difference here is with the coronaviruses, and we don't know specifically all the information yet for this novel coronavirus, but all of the preliminary studies that we're seeing are showing that the antibodies that we do make against this particular virus just don't last very long. And so if that holds true, then our vaccine may produce the same type of response. We don't know just yet. We're not, we're too early in the process to be able to know for sure how long the immune response wanes. But I did read something just this morning, which, there's a prominent celebrity couple where both individuals had contracted confirmed coronavirus, and they were both participating in studies with the government, actually, antibody studies specifically, and they just announced that, they were infected very early on, and now several months later, their antibodies are already waning. So we still, we've seen this in studies that have come out of China. There's a study out of Spain, which is pretty profound, which is saying the same thing. So, in answer to your question, it is very likely. I would expect that we would have to take this annually unless some major event can take place or some adjuvant, which is something that would actually help stimulate a stronger immune response, if added to a vaccine, can be added to prolong the response.
And I know right now some of the companies are studying the vaccines with an adjuvant to help elicit a stronger immune response. So I guess they're anticipating already that might be the case. So they are studying both without and with the adjuvants. And then some of the vaccines that are entering phase 3 trial, most of them will require 2 doses, about 3 to 4 weeks apart. And then they're expected to, the volunteer is expected to be, to elicit a full immune response about 2 weeks after the second dose. So that's how they're creating the vaccines as of now. So you definitely need 2 doses of the vaccine.
And what will the distribution process look like once a vaccine or multiple vaccines are approved?
That's a great question. Distribution will be our next huge challenge once this vaccine is developed. And like we've mentioned before, there's so many people that need to get this vaccine, and developing so many doses is a challenge of itself. So a lot of the vaccine companies that are developing the vaccines right now, they're also partnering with manufacturing companies as well to kind of look ahead to be able to manufacture that many millions and billions of doses. So they're kind of trying to plan for that ahead of time. And obviously, we're going to need probably more than one vaccine manufacturer so it's not going to be just one approved and that's it. We're going to use only that one. We're going to have to look at all the different vaccine manufacturers to see what are the differences, whether we can use both or multiple ones because of that manufacturing capability that we need to account for. Then the next big question comes into play is who is going to regulate all of this, right? So if, let's say, one of the countries is the first one to approve the vaccine and show it to be safe and effective, how do we make sure that we get it to all the other countries? And so in that case, we'll have to have a governing body that already has systems in place of something like this, technologies in place that knows how to distribute something effectively. So an organization like the World Health Organization would probably be a very important part of this distribution process because they already have the technologies in place. They already have the expertise of manipulating something so big. And therefore, they will have to already use some kind of existing infrastructure of navigating this kind of a distribution process so that we are not reinventing the wheel and that we can optimize the distribution process as much as possible. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Cadet?
Yes. So that was like the macro scale. On the global scale, what has to happen? So let's shrink it to a more micro level of the United States and understanding we're 50 states, multiple territories, right? So at this point, there's so much in the news today which is highlighting the fact that there are disparities in our country. So, and we're a medical institution. Health disparities are widespread in the United States. For a variety of reasons. We've got a lot of socioeconomic disparities. Ultimately, that equals a lack of equal access to health care. So, there really needs to be, just like you just described, Dr. Majidova, this centralized process by the World Health Organization, ideally. In the United States, we need to have a centralized process as well. And in that case, we need to have people at the table who really have an understanding of rural medicine, for instance. Inner city medicine, nuances between inner city Detroit versus inner city New York City versus inner city Atlanta, for instance, and so many other potential, issues, areas, concerns, because at the end of the day, the problem is real. So we must acknowledge that there is a problem. And while we all want to solve the problem of lack of equal access to health care, it's not going to be solved overnight. So we need to bring the appropriate people to the table to centralize a process of distribution so that it's fair and equitable in the U.S. as well. I know typically, a lot of things end up going from, they're distributed to the states, and then all the states and territories then go about their own policies. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's a process that we'll have to look at in order to make sure that the distribution process is beneficial to everybody, because as we see in terms of the mitigation effects that we have been encouraged to do in order to mitigate the spread of the virus within the country, what I do affects you. So ultimately, I would presume that this is going to continue. We need to really get the vaccine into everybody's hands and bodies, technically, in order to help mitigate for everyone.
The proposed plan right now for distribution is to begin with populations who are the most vulnerable of contracting COVID-19. So that would be our healthcare workers or anybody on the front lines. And then also populations who are most vulnerable for adverse effects from coronavirus. So our elderly population, anyone with chronic conditions, diabetes, those patients who are overweight. So those who we've seen have had the most death rates from coronavirus as well. And then start distributing to the rest of the population. So that has been the proposed plan. However, that also kind of creates some, I believe it creates some ethical concerns as well, because yes, we are not going to distribute anything unless we have proven that it's safe and effective. However, another part of a clinical trial is the post-marketing surveillance, which is almost like it's considered a phase 4 trial, right? So you might not account for every possible adverse effect that can occur when you're testing in a small population. But once the drug is distributed vaccine is distributed to a larger scale, then you start seeing a lot of these different side effects come through that might not be very common, but yet they still exist. So we might then be predisposing these more vulnerable populations to potential other adverse effects that we haven't accounted for yet. Or if the vaccine is not as effective, then again, we might be falsely giving them hope that they are protected. So while it does make complete sense to begin with the most vulnerable population, we have to kind of thread the waters very carefully and make sure that we are not giving any kind of false hope, or we're not producing any adverse effects that we haven't accounted for. Again, we can't account for that for everything, but we just have to be careful, I believe.
You just jogged my memory on one more thing. One major factor, in addition to all these other, actually everything is a major factor at this point in the distribution process, is the anti-vaccination campaigns. So they're still here. They're still rampant. The United States is not immune to anti-vaccine campaigns. And so the problem here would be that in order to achieve the herd immunity that we're going to need to achieve, in order to resume some sort of normal societal life, we're going to need to get this vaccine distributed to enough people in the U.S. Enough people worldwide, period. And so this is an initiative that we've seen take place and severely affect outcomes and lead to resurgences of other diseases like measles, for instance, or whooping cough, or other diseases. And so this is one of those cases where it's a very challenging set of circumstances that are going to have to pretty much, like you said, tread lightly, dance together, come together, everything fall in place in order to have this vaccine distributed globally as well as, locally in the country, but then to enough people as well.
That's right, because if we want to achieve that herd immunity, we need to have at least 70% of the population immunized, either naturally immunized by getting the virus, or by immunizing via the vaccine. And given that we live in a global world, right, everybody travels everywhere, even if we have really good immunization rates in one country, that might not be the case in another country. And then again, we're exposing the most vulnerable population. So you're right, Dr. Cadet, we need to have very good systems in place in order to ensure that we do achieve that herd immunity. And we don't have to go through these, very difficult quarantine times in the future, hopefully.
Well, thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, we do. So our first question for you, Dr. Feldstein, is, with your past experience in the insurance industry, how do you think uninsured individuals will have access to the vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, I think uninsured individuals are going to have to be covered by either state governments through the exchange, Medicaid, direct pay, whatever, or a federal program. And it kind of gets into your question about distribution, especially in underserved areas. They're just going to have to pay for it. And there's no way we can have reimbursement be an issue where people who aren't insured can't get vaccinated. I mean, this is a public health worldwide pandemic crisis. It's going to have to be paid for, much like the program now. And I hesitate when I say it because, national testing has been such an embarrassment for the United States, but uninsured individuals do get tested. It's covered. It's paid for. So reimbursement's not an issue, and it can't be an issue for the vaccine. It just can't.
So thinking along those lines still, this is going to be a new vaccine. Somebody's going to have to pay for it. Do you believe that insurance companies or perhaps the vaccine manufacturers themselves will cover the costs associated with adverse events that might arise from the vaccine?
Yeah, they will. I mean, they do it now. I mean, you're covered now if you have an adverse event. If you go get a vaccine, you have Guillain-Barré, you end up in the hospital for 6 months, it's covered. And what happens is then the insurers go back to the manufacturers and get reimbursed. Nobody needs to worry about paying for costs due to an adverse event from a vaccine.
That would be something that I think that has, at least I can speak from Georgia, right? And what I see in Georgia, it appears as though the governments have made it very clear that being uninsured or underinsured should not stand in the way of you getting a COVID test. Barring other issues with getting testing, they've made it clear that don't let money be what stops you. So as long as they, continue to make that clear to people, then hopefully, vaccine uptake will be positive.
For distribution, you have to have a national strategy. You just do. I mean, it's just not going to work without. I mean, look how we're handling individual state by state, just, to open, close, whatever. It's a fiasco. And you truly need a comprehensive statewide strategy. And one of the reasons I hope the schools get open at the right time is that's a distribution channel. And just from past experience, I think I'm older than anybody on this call. I mean, for the polio vaccine, we got vaccinated at school. You went to public school and you got your sugar cube. And that was the distribution channel. You didn't go to the doctor's office. You didn't go to a health center. You didn't go to an urgent care center. You went to school. And that's where the greatest amount of kids got immunized for polio. It was done through the schools. And, hopefully that's one avenue that we could, address today. But I mean, distribution is going to be a challenge, especially if it's as haphazard as testing was and is as we've experienced it now. Hopefully it won't be, because it can't be, because it'll just be a fail. And, as you stated, getting into minority populations are high risk. So, we got to make sure we have the distribution channels to get the vaccine where it needs to be. And I think that's a challenge, especially in this current administration. It's more political, unfortunately. We've politicized everything. So I pray that vaccination doesn't get politicized. We know we're going to have the anti-vaxxers. And look at the flu vaccine. I mean, only 50% of the population gets a flu vaccine. And we know as clinicians, 50% of the population is non-compliant with any medical regimen. Mm-hmm. That's why when I see people who don't wear masks, I'm not shocked. I mean, how many people take their hypertensive medication? How many people take their diabetic medication? The only difference is their choice doesn't impact our lives.
Yes.
You don't wear a mask, you don't get vaccinated, you impact everybody else's life around you in a negative way. So hopefully we'll do a better job of vaccinating than we did of testing.
I know we've covered a lot of challenges with distribution of vaccines, but what do you anticipate will be the biggest challenge with vaccinating such a vast population against this virus?
I think it'll be pure distribution and allocation of vaccines. That's why I hope it doesn't get politicized. What states get it first, what populations get it first, that it's funded appropriately, that we don't have vaccines sitting on shelves because there's not enough people to administer vaccines. The sugar cube was easy. Mm-hmm. This is an injection, it's syringes. We don't have enough masks, we don't have gowns. Are we going to have enough syringes? Are we going to listen, 6 months from now, oh, we don't have enough syringes, we can't inject it. Because who would have thought, 6 months ago there wouldn't be enough personal protective equipment.
Or enough nasal swabs to be able to even take samples.
Or reagents to run the test. It's things that we, would normally not think of being an issue that will be an issue. So it's really going to be the distribution chain is where I think, and to have enough raw materials, that we have enough syringes.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we're thinking proactively about this, getting ready for this. Like you said, having everything in place ahead of time.
And we are. There are companies that have ramped up production of syringes, of swabs, for the testing, of the other things that we need. But, Dr. Feldstein, you brought up something that's really important that a lot of people don't think about. Vaccines, in many cases, are refrigerated, right? You go to your doctor's office and they take it out of the refrigerator. Right. Now, the sugar cube doesn't have to be refrigerated per se, or it's at least shelf stable for a longer period.
Correct.
That's a factor. And even in the United States, this particular pandemic has brought to light something that a lot of people didn't know. I can say I didn't know that, for instance, on the Navajo Nation, there's a huge majority of people that live without electricity. And that is happening in this country. And I'm using that population, some of the statistics I've seen to just say these are challenges that we all collectively, I think, have to think about how do we address, because distribution is huge. As
a pharmacist, we've had to go through a lot of approval processes to be able to actually administer vaccines as well. So I think we take a big part in making sure that we do give the flu vaccine and then getting a lot of the population vaccinated so they don't have to go to the doctor's office. So my hope is that with this novel vaccine, we'll also have that approval fast-tracked so that pharmacists will be able to also give the vaccines and kind of speed up the process of getting the population vaccinated as well.
Yeah, I agree. We'll have to use every distribution channel at our disposal. Whatever, wherever, who's ever licensed, whoever can give a vaccination, we'll have to do that so we can maximize the delivery.
I think looking back at the success that the entire world had with eradicating smallpox, it's not far-fetched to say that there are things in place that worked. They worked in industrialized nations. They worked in non-industrialized nations. They worked in a variety of conditions. And we successfully eradicated the world of a virus that, was devastating. There's differences, and that's a time for another conversation in terms of what are some of the differences there. But the point, I think, is that it's been done. It's not unprecedented. So if we can pull all those same resources with the advances that we have today, it's doable.
Yeah, I think even with the measles vaccine, that was fast-tracked as well. Even though it took about 4 years, but it was still a much quicker process than any other vaccine development. And we had a full eradication at some point. So.
Well, I just hope that next year at this time we're not having this same conversation.
Or if we are, we're at a much reduced level, so we might even be in the same room, perhaps.
Hopefully. That would be fun. Well, I just want to thank both of you for joining us today. This was a great conversation. I can't wait for it to get out to the community so people can listen to it. We appreciate your expertise and extensive knowledge about the process involved in developing safe and effective vaccines. To listen to past episodes of this podcast and become a subscriber, visit our SoundCloud page or visit us on iTunes by searching Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm Jay Feldstein, and this has been PCOM Perspectives.